था. जोरदार तालियों से हम उनका मंच पे स्वागत करेंगे. Aditya Arya is an eminent commercial and travel photographer. He began professional photography in 1980 after graduating in history from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, and he wears many hats. He is known for his expertise in the field of advertising and corporate photography, specializing in products, interiors, and food. At present, he divides his time between his photography and the Museo Camera, which is the largest not-for-profit photography museum in Southeast Asia. मैं चाहूँगा हम अगर वो यहाँ पर है तो उनका मंच पे स्वागत करें. जोरदार तालियां होनी चाहिए. And as the discussion for this session, we are delighted to have Dr. Meera Das ji with us. She is the member of Society for Culture and Environment. She is a former member of NMA and convener of INTAC. She is an art historian, conversation architect, and architect with specialization in matters of cultural policies. She is also a writer and has deep interest in history and archaeology of towns of India, both historical and current. The stage is all yours, and I would request you to please unfold the conversation. तालियां कम क्यों लग रही हैं? जी हाँ, तालियां बेहतरीन होनी चाहिए.
I mean, we are fortunate that he is here today because he was hugely in demand in Delhi at the moment. The government of Haryana really wanted to include him in the G20 preparations, and his museum being such a special museum. And he rushed through all this. He caught the flight and he reached here. So we are grateful for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Arya.
Thank you.
And without really, I mean, your slides will talk about what you are, and he is a person who has expanded the concept of museum to several areas. It has become very inclusive, and it covers all aspects of photography. It's not just about photographs, but it's about anthropology, it's about various other things. And I would like to get started on his presentation so that we can give more time for discussion.
So thank you very much, and special thanks to the society, to the Literary Society of Bhopal, which has invited me. So thank you very much. And it's very interesting I'm here today. So my journey as a 20-year-old college pass out started here in this very place where we are sitting just now. My first assignment by Madhya Pradesh Tourism was something is being constructed, go shoot that place. And this was it. I came here, so it's like full circle. Today I'm here. So Madhya Pradesh Tourism introduced me to Madhya Pradesh at the age of 20, and I worked here for almost 20 years, going back and forth, shooting areas. Yeah. So to start with the slides, one of the first few projects I did was I covered places like Mandu and Orcha. I spent months here shooting for the brochures and catalogs of Madhya Pradesh Tourism, which introduced me to this fantastic state. And my journey started from here. So that's one of the catalogs which I had done for EPCO, an organization called EPCO, way back in 80s on Mandu, where I spent many months shooting that. And subsequently, the next slide, I think we can carry on if I have a slide changer. So, and subsequently I was sent to shoot Jhabua way back in 80s. So can you imagine? All this was the analog days, the film days, which was such a big challenge. Everything had to be perfect. And but anyway, the life moved on. I moved on to advertising, and that's the kind of work I did for next 40 years. And I traveled very extensively. So this is very important for you to understand from where do I come from. It's advertising, shooting people, places, working in the mines, working in Nagaland, which was my self-driven project in 80s, where I actually witnessed tiger feast, and in fact, one of the last headhunting incidents which took place, I was around that time in 80s. Today people go and celebrate Hornbill Festival, but I don't feel like going there after working there for so many years with the actual tribes. So these are some of the images from my Nagaland days. Ma'am, would you like to turn so that you can see the... Okay. So, yeah, Tiger Feast. In 84, I attended 2 Tiger Feasts where tigers were actually killed and consumed by the tribals. So from there, one moved on to the world of industrial photography, and which was very interesting. So all these things were experiences which taught me a lot about how do things happen, and which actually later on helped me construct the museum. It helped me about understanding the technology which goes into making of products, and the processes. Worked in Ladakh very extensively. This is Pengyong. Launched many hotels all over the world. So, you know, photography is the only profession which takes you all over and somebody else pays for it. So it's very interesting. And the analog days were all about perfection, which is, today the world is driven by imperfection, you know. There is a button which actually takes care of all your mistakes, delete. There was no delete button. I come from the time when there was no delete button. And it was a great learning experience, because life is very different when there is no delete button. You have to create perfect images, and whatever you do, there has to be a perfection. You don't have too many opportunities. Film was 36 exposures. That's it. Today, 62 GB card gives you 5,000 images, which was not there. Working in difficult situations like this, in mines and industrial situations. Creating ads. So 1980, one of the MDs of MP Tourism was Mr. Sen, who later on went on to become the I think civil aviation and MD of Indian Airlines. I shot many ads. So this is where my story began. At the age of 17, my father gave me this camera, Zeiss Icon, which really intrigued me. And the first thing which I used to do was dismantle, like any college kid or school kid. You know, there was something called mechano set. And it had a screwdriver, it had a plier, it had just 4 or 5 things in it. So I opened it, but I was able to put it back also. And I figured out how that camera worked. And that led to my curiosity about the whole story of photography. I did history in college. And I said, look, where does this device come from? How did this photography start? And I started picking up cameras, and my collection kept growing, and all this was housed in the basement of my house. And slowly people started visiting, and people started writing about it. And 2016 or 17, I ended up collecting some 7,000 cameras from 1860 onwards. And I was amazed. But I kept inviting people on the weekends to come and see. But one of my the life-changing episodes was this gentleman, Kulwant Roy, which I did explain to you about. Kulwant Roy was one of the few photojournalists who documented the freedom movement. from 1930s. He followed Gandhiji, he followed Muslim League, he followed all the leaders, and he kept shooting. This was it. He was based in Lahore, then migrated to India in 47. Somehow was in touch with my family, with my mother's family. And he left his, in 84 he passed away and left his collection of almost 10,000 negatives of freedom movement with me, and which I did not open till 2008. And this is what happened when I opened it in 2008. I said, let me just look into it. After 25 years, and I said, let me check what's in these boxes. And it actually changed my life, because inside were rare negatives and images of what he had shot. Krebs mission, cabinet mission, he was there. So the original negatives of Gandhiji's first visit to Uthmanzai in 1938 to meet Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and his followers. And this is how the negatives were kept. But he had annotated his stuff. Yeah, 1938, Northwest Frontier Province trip, Gandhiji with Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Amazing images. And I started working on this, which ended in this book, finally, History in the Making. So this was a 3-year-long sabbatical, you can say, from my professional life. But while all this was happening, I was getting drawn into technology. And this is when some enlightened officers said, let's make a museum in Gurgaon. And I started working on the museum. Next slide. We selected an abandoned badminton court and transformed this into a museum. This is what the museum looks like today. It's spread over 0.75 acre of land, and this is what it was when I started construction. Now the problem was we did not have any money to hire any specialist or museologist or even architects. So this is very important, because the power of crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and the knowledge which one had accumulated over 30, 40 years as a photographer, seeing how places run, how the hotels are run, how hotels are constructed, how the factories are, and whenever I visited museums abroad, I took notes and created a diary for myself, how the lighting happens, and yeah, some more images. One was partly influenced by Pompidou. I don't know how many of you have seen Pompidou. Pompidou is one of the world's most beautiful museum in France, Paris. It's inside out. So this was very inspiring, and my museum, actually, I replicated this inside out. This is what Pompidou looks like. Everything is exposed. So the point is, there is no need to hide. There is no need to create false ceilings and spend money, and this is what we have done at the museum. This is 2016 and 17, when I was just about thinking and planning, detailing of how the museums work all over the world, how the steps are made, because I was going to have huge steps leading up, and the girders, the structures. And another place which is very inspiring was Tate. Tate Modern. Tate Modern has evolved from a power plant. It was a power plant in London, which has been converted into a museum and an art gallery. So that was again very inspiring. I said, expose girders and lines running all over. I said, this is what my museum is going to look like. So the inspiration was based on these modern day museums, which have, one was constructed, which has evolved. Because we were also repurposing a place which was given to us. So 2018, I started construction with no architectural teams, no consultants, with friends helping me, with friends whom I could call and say, can you calculate the load factor? Can you calculate the length of this beam for me? And we would do that and give it to IIT to get it confirmed and say, okay, this is it. And the municipal corporation, the Gurgaon government agreed to all those things and said, yes, if the structure is approved, designed, you can take it ahead. And what I did was we excavated the entire badminton court and created a building within a building, because we wanted to use the existing structure. And this is how the museum evolved. One had to be there for almost 17 months, day and night, to supervise, because we didn't have a team to do all that. But I was happy to do that, because as a photographer, you know, photographers are no strangers to sunrises and sunsets. They're always present everywhere. And technically, one had learnt enough how to construct. So this was the story of the museum, which in sometime 4 months after we started construction, the contractor stopped work. And he said, you know, you keep pushing us too much. Government projects are not meant to finish. They're supposed to evolve, and we live on escalations. So I said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, escalations. He said, yeah, the government projects don't finish for years. You want to make a museum in 10 months, it can take 10 years. So this was the story. Next day, I surrendered the project back to the government. I said, your contractor doesn't want to finish. And within 24 hours, he was penalized for 45 lakhs, and he actually finished it in 17 months. Though he told me he'll never, if he ever finds me involved with any other government project, he'll make sure that he doesn't apply for that. So that was the story of pushing a government project forward, and it actually evolved. These are some of the images of when we were constructing this museum on daily basis, meetings, checking all the drawings. So this was a very fascinating process for me, because I was also very interested in interacting with the workers, and I had in mind an idea that I'll dedicate this museum to the workers. And I captured almost close to 10,000 images of the making of the museum, and especially the faces, the people who made it. And they also felt very connected with me later on. And if they had any issues with the contractor, they would tell me, sir, this guy is not paying us. Will you please speak to him? And how do you design a museum? This was a big challenge, because we didn't have any teams as such. So what I did was I started making mock-ups. I said, okay, very simple. Let's make mock-ups of each and every shelf, what the size is going to be, what is the font size is going to be. I come from advertising background, so I said, this is very simple, and we'll do it ourselves. So we made these mock-ups of each and every shelf, hired local carpenters from a nearby village, who we trained. Um, we did a lot of dummy, rough planning sessions, and we said, okay, this is how it'll look. But everything was being done in-house and constantly being monitored by me. What is the font size? What is the display size? How the lighting is going to be of the museum. And this is what that timeline which you saw we were planning, this is how it looks today. As a lot of people have told me, this is one of the best museums they've ever seen. We get tons of visitors there. These days, on the weekends, we get close to, each Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we get close to 500 to 600 visitors there. But it was all about driving that idea with the officials and contractors, how the work has to be done. So this is the most interesting chandelier in the world. It's made out of 72 twin lens reflex cameras. It's the only chandelier of its kind in the world which we actually fabricated in the museum. First floor is art galleries where we do shows. We're going to be showcasing Mr. Balu Monde. So there's so much of detailing which has gone into this making of the museum. And one has been constantly planning this, how the visitor experience is going to be, how they go up the stairs and one of the most important things in the museum is immersive experiences. So we have an analog lab where actually students can process films, make prints the way they were done in 19th century. So we practice cyanotype printing, salt prints, and silver prints, and gum bichromate prints. These are all historic processes because museum is all about the history and art and its evolution. So this is the wall at the entrance which is dedicated to the workers who created the museum. We are taking lots of parts. This is our last year's show at the India Art Fair, which was hugely popular. A pop-up at Select City Walk Mall, Saket. We get lots of ambassadors and foreign dignitaries now who would like to. Lenin is the French ambassador, is a photographer himself. He's just published a book with Raghurai, in fact. And he loves museum. He's been there 6 times. So he loves dark room. And this is our dark room where we make prints and Raghurai. So we do lots of workshops, classes. So museum is not about just showcasing. It's about a kind of a dialogue between the visitor and involving them into various activities. School children are very, very essential for us because every week we do get few thousand school children from all kind of schools who come and spend time at the museum. So art schools, colleges, architecture students. So even nursery students, we allow them to experiment at the lab and So now slowly the recognition is happening of the museums. So there was a time when museums were known as Ajaib Ghars, and they were very dull, dilapidated places showcasing the old and the funny things basically, or somebody's collection. But nowadays the museums are interactive spaces. They actually connect with the audience. So the whole idea of making this museum was an interactive space, and we are slowly getting recognized for doing that. We did run out of money during the lockdown, which was a very terrible period because lockdown happened 6 months after the inauguration of the museum. But various companies came forward with CSR funds. So we have a solar power plant which is almost 60 kilowatt on our rooftop now, which generates enough power. We have a museum shop which which pays for lots of things which happen at the museum. We have a wall of donors, people who have donated. We recognize them at the entrance because I believe museums are collective spaces and all-inclusive spaces. And museums are not really made by only rich people, like some industrialists in our case, or by the government. It can be anybody who can make a museum. So, thank you. This is the story of making of the museum.
Much for the very nice presentation. Before I ask you questions, the last question, I am asking the last question first. Is your museum sustainable? Do you generate enough
very
money?
soon we will be sustainable if things, if there is no fourth wave or we've had a share of issues, but we've sorted out most of the things.
So this was supposed to be the last question, but I would like to say a few things. One is there is a question of museums. Now museum by itself is such a large subject, and we have all kinds of museums across the world. It's a foreign concept which has come to India and finally got kind of...
But Ajaib Ghar was always our concept. All the Rajas, Maharajas had Ajaib Ghars.
True. It's a larger museum.
Yeah.
And
कहाँ जा रहे हो? संडे को अजायब घर चलते हैं यहाँ जरा.
But which also meant zoo, or which also meant all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So museums is one thing, but a photography museum is another thing, because photography combines, you look at the world through a camera eye. It incorporates aesthetic sense of the cameraman, the person behind the camera. There is technology, because there are cameras and cameras and cameras, and not just the cameras, but also the way you print it. So how you, what you see through the, and also it is, sorry, please.
Yeah, sorry. Photography is the only art form in the world which has a very deep link with the tech and the craft. Unlike fine art, painting, the paints and the brushes have remained the way they were, but here the technology has evolved hugely. Ours is the only museum of its kind in Asia which traces the history of photography through more than 7,000 objects. And it tries to connect the story of photography, all the dots, how the silver grains have turned into the pixels of today. Today's generation has no idea, or very little idea, I shouldn't say no idea, very little idea about the silver grains, the analog days, how we created perfect images, how we worked in the darkroom to create these images. The only person I can think of here is Bhalu, whose family knows more about the technology than anybody else probably in the world. Yes. His brother made prints for MoMA, if I'm not wrong. The only person, dye transfer prints, which is, technology is dead today. Nobody knows about dye transfer technology, but see, so our museum is all about teaching, learning. Museums are great educational spaces. And it's not only about showcasing something, it's about actually an experience. So we have a dark room. And on the weekends we have classes where we actually take students through the whole process. We said, do it yourself. Shoot a roll of film, process it, make a print. And then, their eyes open and they say, wow, this is, because there's so much of touch and feel to analog world, which is missing in the digital world.
Unlike painting, photography is capturing the moment. If you missed the light, if you have missed the event, the moment, things are gone. So also kind of reading the situation and to be there at that time to take the photograph.
So, yeah, this is life before the delete button. And also, photography was all about pre-visualization, creating an image here and then capturing it immediately. And unlike today, where things are done in post, we actually created images here first. And it worked very fast. And that process has been lost, but we talk about that process. And see, painters start with a blank canvas. Now, Bhalu is a great guy to comment on this. You start with the blank canvas and you say, everything is a figment of your imagination. You say, okay, I want a mountain here, I want a tree here, a photographer actually starts recomposing. He sees a frame and he says, hey, so it's a process of elimination. I recompose an image while painter adds to it. It's an additive process. So it's very interesting how photography has been perceived and carries on. I mean, today, there is a problem with photography. It's also become an additive process. Why? अरे यार ये Photoshop में उठा के इधर लगा देते हैं. So photography is changing. It's becoming an additive process from a subtractive process. So there are many talks which we organize at the museum. So every 15 days we do a talk with some well-known photographer, and which are open to people to.
Just one last comment before I open the house for questioning. One is that there's a question of even the photographs kind of go beyond realism. There is, as we know, Dali has done this photographs, which is surreal photography. So it has no limit. I mean, it can extend to plain realism, to post-realism, to whatever. But there is also a question of what subject you choose. So there is a lot of anthropology. I was particularly interested in your Nagaland photographs. So one is supposed to follow it, go to places, know the subject, till you finally come out with the results that we can see. So one was that. I would like you to talk a little bit about the Nagaland experience. And the second is that Mr. Kulwant Rai's collection that you gathered. And it was a complete insight into history which people did not know through photographs, you also capturing the moment. So if you could talk a little bit about it, and then we would open the house for questions. Thank you.
Photographers are visual archivists. What they leave behind and what they create, the archives, are very important for the future generations. How people lived, how they worked. So for me as a photographer, all my personal projects have been towards documentary. which are personal projects. So you do commercial projects which pay for your personal projects. I'm not a practicing photographer anymore, but all my life I've kept a balance between my personal projects and for Kulwant Roy, it was something which was very different. He was one of the first few photojournalists in the country, way back in 30s, when the word photojournalism wasn't really, there were just 5, 6 of them. They were based in Lahore and a couple other places. They used to sell pictures to the local publications like Tribune and make a living. So it was more about making a living and being with these leaders of those days. He was a very strong nationalist. So he used to tell me that whenever we used to go and cover anything, he said, first thing is we would go and give 1 anna to Gandhiji's charity box because it was for a cause. So, photographers have different reasons for being in this various professions. But as to be a documentary photographer is very important, to do your personal documentation. Right now at the museum, we are showing the most important collection in the world. It has come to us from Hungary. There was a photographer called Robert Capa. So we are showcasing his collection at the museum, which has been lent to us by the Hungarian government. This is the first time. Robert Capa covered Spanish Civil War, World War, Vietnam War, and finally, while covering the Vietnam War, he stepped on the landmine and he was blown in pieces. So it's a fantastic collection of original prints. So it's kind of a very important, what you see in the pictures is why they were done.
Yeah. We can set the floor open for audiences, I believe. Yes. Any questions from the audience? Yes. You can raise your hand. Yes. Mr. Abhilash.
Great presentation, Mr. Arya. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, because you have been referring to Ajaib Ghar and Meeraji was also saying, lekin all said and done in India, somehow museums are not, they have not got a place they deserved in our day-to-day life or career. Not many. I come from Indore. We have got only one museum. Bhopal, luckily, we have got several museums. Tribal art is that. There is a newspaper museum here. And in that newspaper museum, some time ago, a rice miller from Chhattisgarh had sent in his 6,000 books collection to that museum. So I was asking you how, like you said about Hungary donation, are you getting some rare artifacts about photography, camera, or other things as donation for your museum?
Absolutely.
And has your museum triggered some kind of interest among the society, which I feel personally is not about. There was a Pravasi Bharatiya Sammelan in Indore 3 days ago, but people have nothing to look at in Indore. Frankly speaking, I love Indore. He comes from Indore, Bhalu. But there are no museums, there are no. So, how would you, would you like to throw light on that?
The responsibility lies on Indore. I've created a museum. I've pushed the museum. So last 1 year, we've had more than 60,000 visitors there. And on Friday, Saturdays, we are reaching 500-600 visitors a day. It's how my small team and I we talk to everyone. And in November, sometime in November last year, one delegation came to me from Ministry of External Affairs. So they came to check the museum. And the result happened today, when last night the Chief Minister announced that Museo Camera will be showcased to all the G20 visitors in the month of March. So the point is, you have to drive that. You have to make sure that there is a connect between the people. Today, you talk to anybody in Gurgaon or NCR, they say, oh, we have to go to the Museo Camera. So, is something which the responsibility lies on somebody. Now, we cannot expect government to be doing everything. I'm sorry to say, people say, yeah, this should be government's responsibility. There has to be somebody who has to say, okay, let's make a museum. Now, that museum of newspapers, you said, you know what? I was always interested in buying and collecting a litho machine or a typesetting machines. Do you have a typesetting machine here in that museum? How the hot metal typesetting used to happen. You know, I used to see Times of India way back in 70s and 80s, how the hot typesetting used to happen. Hot metal. It was amazing. Where is that machine lying? Where is that technology? Why can't we show it to the today's generation? So it's also the responsibility of, I think, 60 plus generation, 50 plus generation, to make sure that they pass on the knowledge to the next generation. That's my, as far as photography is concerned, that's what I'm trying to do by creating that museum.
Okay.
I mean, there are ample opportunities to create.
Thank you, sir. Let's move on to
Yeah,
a
can
second
I-
question.
Thank you, Mr. Arya. Great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you talked about several things. Sustainable use of space from the outside as well as inside. Mentioned about Centre Pompidou. Just the opposite of Centre Pompidou. We were amazed to see a museum last month in Nuremberg, in one of the areas in Germany, which is very heavily bombed, as you know. So a residential area. It's a fantastic residential area, but that was actually an industrial area before that, completely bombed out. But they kept one factory still there to show that there was an industrial area here. And that was a museum. And that was called as the Museum for Industrial Kultur, which translates into Museum for Industrial Culture. It also has a great collection of cameras also, just for your information. It's in
okay.
Nuremberg.
I would love to talk to you and hear
Please,
about it.
we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
As well as state and other galleries that we saw.
You'll be amazed, few years back, Kodak, which was the world's largest photography equipment film manufacturer, sometime in, they went bankrupt, by the way, because they didn't think of technology. They never expected digital to destroy them, wipe them out. They were demolishing the plant. I actually wrote to people in Rochester. I said, I want one brick of that plant. I would love to keep it in the museum and say, this is the plant where the photography was born in 1888. This is where the first film was made. So, it's how you create stories out of things. But there has to be a story around everything. I'm sure there are millions of things around here which could create stories.
Last point was just mentioned by the gentleman over there, which is, when we saw the museum, the Baroda Museum, the art gallery.
Yeah, I've been there to Baroda.
So there we saw that, the Maharaja had commissioned, and there's a date, 1854, some date, in commissioned something called the lithotintography or something like that, printing, for mass production of the paintings of Raja Ravi Verma, which people would not be able to afford, so that it can be made available at a cheaper rate so that people can have it in their houses. That process, I don't know whether it still exists or not, but there's no need for it anyway.
So that process is also taught to students in the art schools and colleges, print making process. I don't have a machine, but I do teach similar processes where you can create 19th century prints. But we need to do a lot more.
Yes, third question, and the last one.
Hello, sir. So I wanted to ask, nowadays all these different kind of expertise, like how you are a photographer, different other disciplines are coming up, like graphic design, exhibition design, photography design itself, curation. And when you are designing a museum, all these things come together and create the entire space. So do you think these expertise are needed, or a person can go on themselves and create an entire space for themselves?
I've done it. So the point is, you can join an IIM and learn the art of marketing in 2 years, or you can work with a Lalaji and spend 10 years and learn how to create a brand. I mean, there were these big old families which created brands, but IIM teaches you that in 2 years. So, it's needed if you really want to learn, and you want an all-inclusive knowledge from all over, because that one man will only give you his point of view. I think colleges but at the museum we run on interns. We teach, we give them a hands-on experience, how to do things. We experiment. I said, okay, try this typeset. Does it work? See this font. Is it readable? What will, check it out with the kids. Can they look up? It's all very practical knowledge. So we actually work with interns, and interns from architecture, from design schools. It's a great experience for them. Pardon? I am the chief chowkidar and the curator.
Okay, thank you so much, Aditya ji and Meera ji. जोरदार तालियां होनी चाहिए उनके लिए.
I will just sum up
Sure, ma'am.
in a second.
Sure.
I just want to point out that Rima ji works in this museum, City Museum, Jaipur, and they took out a little booklet called The Story of the Objects. So this is a collective thing, but every object that you have has a story behind it. Yeah. So, it can be that deep and it can be that connecting. So, so I thank you for your presentation, and I am sure everybody is benefited by.
Thank you.
Indeed.
I'm looking for funds to create a book like that, but I'm putting together a book on how I made this museum and the whole story of this museum, and people who inspired me to actually and continue to inspire me, because every day at the museum is a new day. Absolutely no. I made it very clear right in the beginning that you will sign on a stamp paper that you are giving this to us, and I promise you we will create something world class. And today when the Chief Secretary of Haryana came and he said, oh, I didn't expect it to be like this, but yes, it's fit for G20. So, it's very heartening to see all these reactions from these people and the trust they placed on. Now, the problem is the trust. We've had incidents in, Kingdom of Dreams. That was a great idea.
मुझे लगता नहीं आज आदित्य जी जल्दी जा पाएंगे. I think we'll have to continue the conversation outside this room. I'm so sorry because we have got time limitations. पर इससे पहले सर आप जाएं, मैं चाहूँगा ऋचा जी यहाँ पर आएँ, the member of Society for Culture and Environment. उनके लिए भी तालियां होनी चाहिए. और मैं चाहूँगा कि आदित्य जी को और मीरा जी को एक मेमेंटो के द्वारा प्रेम पूर्वक उनका अभिनंदन करें और हमारा आभार प्रकट करते हुए जो मेमेंटो है द मैस्कट ऑफ द भोपाल लिटरेचर एंड आर्ट फेस्टिवल वो पेश करें और हम सब तालियों से उनका साथ दें. ऑफ कोर्स. व्हाट एन आयरनी कि हम एक इतने बेहतरीन म्यूजियम में बैठ के म्यूजियम की बात कर रहे हैं, म्यूजियम की बातें सुनी, काफ़ी महत्वपूर्ण चर्चा रही और काफ़ी कुछ नया हमें पता चला. थैंक यू सो मच एवरीवन. एंड नाउ क्विकली it's the time for the third question. Thank you so much to our authors and discussants for being there with us. एक बार उनके लिए फिर से जोरदार तालियां हो जाएं. And now the third question on the screen, please. Name the VJ who was the part of BLF 2020, who is also a famous chef and is the wife of Arshad Warsi. Raise your hand. Okay, यहाँ पे please mic दे दिया जाए. मारिया गोरेती. अगर आंसर गलत हुआ तो हम कुछ पेनल्टीज लगा सकते हैं. Well, the answer is right. जोरदार तालियां हो जाए. मैम, what's your good name? रविशर जी के लिए एक प्राइज फ्रॉम द टीम ऑफ BLF. जोरदार तालियां रविशर जी के लिए. नाइस. दैट्स द करेक्ट आंसर. मारिया गोरेटी. यस. अब आगे बैठने का सबसे अच्छा फायदा आपने उठा लिया. ओके, ग्रेट. सो